was seemingly running for his life out of an airport to never be seen again. It's been almost 10 years, and not a single person has seen him since.
July 8, 2014, Varna Airport, Bulgaria. A young German tourist named Lars Mittank appears on CCTV footage, calmly walking through the terminal one moment, then suddenly sprinting away in apparent terror the next. He dashes toward the exit, drops his luggage, and runs across the parking lot toward a nearby forest. He scales a fence with surprising agility and disappears. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Lars Mittank for over a decade. For 11 years, his disappearance remained one of Europe's most baffling missing persons cases until the stunning breakthrough of 2025 that would finally provide answers to the questions that had haunted his family, internet sleuths, and investigators alike. What happened to Lars Mittank, and why did he run? Before we unravel the mystery of his disappearance, we must understand the man at its center. Lars Mittank was, by all accounts, an ordinary 28-year-old from Itzehoe, Germany. Born in 1986, he worked as a power company technician, a job he held steadily for several years before his disappearance. Friends described him as reliable, level-headed, and sociable, not the type of person prone to erratic behavior or impulsive decisions. Standing at about 6 feet tall with a slim build, short brown hair, and a friendly demeanor, Lars was the kind of person who easily blended into a crowd. His mother, Sandra Mittank, would later tell reporters that her son had never shown signs of mental illness or paranoia. He was just normal Lars, she said, always joking, always smiling. Lars lived a structured life in his hometown. He enjoyed playing soccer on weekends, spent time with a close circle of friends, and maintained a good relationship with his family. He wasn't known to be a regular drug user, nor did he have any history of alcohol abuse. His medical records showed no underlying conditions that might explain what was to come. The summer of 2014 was supposed to be like any other. Lars had saved up for a vacation with his friends. A week of relaxation on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast, a popular destination for young Europeans seeking affordable beach getaways. The group had chosen Golden Sands, a resort town known for its vibrant nightlife and pristine beaches. This was meant to be a simple holiday, a brief escape from the routine of working life before returning to Germany refreshed. The Golden Sands holiday. The coastal resort of Golden Sands sits along Bulgaria's Black Sea shore, a stretch of beaches backed by lush forests and dotted with high-rise hotels. When Lars and his 4 friends arrived in early July 2014, the summer season was in full swing. The beaches were crowded with tourists, music poured from open-air clubs, and the atmosphere was carefree and festive. For the first few days, the vacation proceeded exactly as planned. Lars and his friends spent their days sunbathing, swimming in the warm waters of the Black Sea, and their evenings exploring the resort's restaurants and bars. Photos from these initial days show Lars smiling, beer in hand, surrounded by friends, the picture of a young man enjoying his summer holiday. On their 4th night in Golden Sands, July 6th, the group decided to watch the FIFA World Cup match between Argentina and Belgium at a local bar. The venue was packed with tourists from various countries, the atmosphere charged with the competitive energy of international football. According to Lars's friends, the night was going well until a seemingly minor incident occurred. At some point during the evening, Lars became separated from his group and found himself in a confrontation with a group of 4 men, reportedly Bulgarian nationals. Accounts of what exactly transpired vary, but witnesses described a verbal altercation that quickly escalated. One of Lars's friends, Christian, later told investigators that when they found Lars, he appeared shaken but physically unharmed. He told us these guys had threatened him, Christian recounted in a police statement. He said they were after him because he was German and that one of them was a dealer who thought Lars had reported him to the police. What seemed like a typical vacation scuffle would take on much greater significance in light of Lars's subsequent behavior. That night, he complained of ear pain and dizziness, claiming he had been punched in the head during the altercation. His friend suggested seeking medical attention, but Lars initially refused, preferring to rest in his hotel room. By morning, however, the pain had worsened considerably. Lars finally agreed to see a doctor, a decision that would mark the beginning of a strange and troubling sequence of events. As his friends prepared to return to Germany, their pre-booked flights couldn't be changed. Lars would remain behind in Bulgaria alone for the first time since arriving in the country. The medical mystery. The doctor's diagnosis seemed straightforward enough. Lars had suffered a ruptured eardrum, likely from a blow to the head during the previous night's altercation. This type of injury, while painful, isn't typically serious. However, it did present a significant complication for someone planning to fly home. The pressure changes during air travel could potentially worsen the damage and cause extreme pain. Dr. Kostov, the physician who examined Lars at a local clinic in Golden Sands on July 7th, advised him not to fly for at least a few days. He prescribed an antibiotic called cefuroxime to prevent infection and recommended that Lars stay in Bulgaria until his ear healed sufficiently for air travel. With his friends unable to delay their return to Germany, Lars checked into a new hotel, the Hotel Color, to wait alone until he could safely fly home. It was in this period of solitude that the first signs of his increasingly paranoid behavior began to emerge. Phone calls between Lars and his mother on July 7th revealed his growing anxiety. In one call, he reportedly whispered, "I don't know if I'll ever see you again," and claimed he was being followed. When his mother suggested he go to the police, Lars responded that he didn't know who to trust. According to Sandra Mittank, her son's demeanor had completely changed from their earlier conversations during the vacation. Most puzzling was Lars's sudden fixation on the medication he had been prescribed. In text messages to friends, he expressed concern that the cefuroxime might be harmful, despite it being a commonly prescribed antibiotic with well-established safety. He reportedly asked his mother to research the drug and became agitated when discussing it. Was this simply the understandable anxiety of a young man alone in a foreign country after a confrontation? Or was something more medically significant occurring? The doctor who examined Lars noted nothing unusual about his mental state during the appointment, describing him as concerned but coherent. Yet by the evening of July 7th, hotel staff reported that Lars appeared visibly distressed, repeatedly checking the locks on his door and asking about security measures. He called the reception desk after midnight, claiming he could hear people outside his room trying to get in. The next morning, despite his ear injury and the doctor's advice, Lars abruptly decided to return to Germany. He checked out of his hotel at 6 a.m. on July 8th and took a taxi to Varna Airport. The driver later told police that his passenger seemed nervous throughout the journey, frequently looking back as if checking whether they were being followed. The airport footage. The CCTV footage from Varna Airport on the morning of July 8, 2014 has become one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in modern missing persons cases. Viewed millions of times online, these grainy security camera images show the last confirmed moments of Lars Mittank before his disappearance, and they're as perplexing as they are disturbing. The timestamp reads 8:50 a.m. as Lars enters the airport terminal. He appears calm, if somewhat subdued, rolling his small suitcase toward the check-in area. Dressed in a yellow t-shirt, shorts, and carrying a backpack, he looks like any other tourist heading home after a vacation. For approximately 20 minutes, his movements through the airport seem normal and purposeful. Then comes the airport's medical center, where Lars goes for a routine fitness-to-fly check due to his eardrum injury. According to Dr. Dimitrov, who examined him, Lars was initially cooperative but became visibly anxious when an airport construction worker entered the office to ask the doctor a question. What happens next is where the footage becomes truly baffling. At 9:13 a.m., the cameras capture Lars suddenly emerging from the medical center, no longer walking but sprinting at full speed. His face shows what appears to be genuine terror. He darts through the terminal, weaving between startled travelers, looking back repeatedly as if being pursued. The exterior cameras then show Lars bursting out of the terminal doors, still running at maximum speed. He drops his luggage by a taxi, vaults over a waist-high barrier, and continues sprinting across the parking lot. In the final frames where he's visible, Lars is scaling a 6-foot fence at the airport perimeter with surprising agility before disappearing into a sunflower field that borders a dense forest area. Body language experts who have analyzed the footage note that Lars's movements indicate genuine fear rather than staged behavior. His posture, the way he repeatedly looks over his shoulder, and his abandonment of all his possessions suggest he perceived an immediate threat to his life. What makes the footage even more puzzling is that no one appears to be following him. No suspicious figures can be identified in the background, no one gives chase when he flees, and airport security reported no incidents that might explain such a panicked reaction. Years of searching. The immediate search for Lars Mittank began within hours of his disappearance. Bulgarian police, alerted by airport security about the strange incident, conducted a sweep of the immediate area surrounding the airport, including the sunflower field and adjacent woods where Lars was last seen heading. Despite using dogs and a helicopter, they found no trace of the missing German tourist. When Lars failed to return to Germany or contact his family, his mother Sandra flew to Bulgaria on July 12, 2014 to coordinate with local authorities and raise awareness about her son's disappearance. She distributed flyers with Lars's photo throughout Varna and the Golden Sands resort area, spoke to potential witnesses, and made repeated appeals through local media. "I just want to know what happened to my son," she told reporters at the time. "Something was clearly wrong. The Lars in that video isn't the son I know." By late 2014, the case had attracted international attention, particularly after the airport's CCTV footage was released online. The dramatic nature of the video, showing a seemingly ordinary young man suddenly fleeing in terror, captured public imagination and spawned countless theories across internet forums and social media. In 2015, the official investigation in Bulgaria began to lose momentum as leads dried up. Despite multiple reported sightings in the Varna region, none could be confirmed. German authorities, limited by jurisdiction, could only provide support to the Bulgarian investigation, which was hampered by language barriers and bureaucratic complications. Sandra Mittank refused to give up. In 2016, she established the Find Lars Mittank Foundation, raising funds to hire private investigators and maintain public awareness of her son's case. The foundation coordinated with various missing persons organizations across Europe and offered a $30,000 reward for information leading to Lars's discovery. Between 2017 and 2019, several organized searches of the more remote areas around Varna Airport were conducted by volunteer groups. Using drones and ground-penetrating radar, these teams explored abandoned buildings, wells, and densely vegetated areas that might have been overlooked in earlier searches. Despite these efforts, no significant evidence emerged. By 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic complicated cross-border investigations, and physical searches were temporarily suspended. However, the online community of amateur detectives continue to analyze the case, examining everything from Lars's medical records to weather patterns on the day he disappeared. The 2022 release of a popular documentary series featuring Lars's case reignited public interest. The three-part production included new interviews with Lars's friends who had been with him in Bulgaria, hotel staff who had observed his behavior, and the doctors who had treated him. While the documentary offered no definitive answers, it brought forward some previously unreported details about Lars's final days, including additional text messages that further suggested his growing paranoia. The 2025 breakthrough. The call came on April 17, 2025. Sandra Mittank, who had never changed her phone number in the 11 years since her son's disappearance, answered to hear the voice of Detective Elena Petrova from the Varna Regional Police Department. "We've found something," the detective said. "Something significant." A construction crew breaking ground for a new industrial complex approximately 12 kilometers from Varna Airport had made an unexpected discovery. While clearing a densely wooded area that had remained largely untouched for decades, workers uncovered human remains beneath a shallow layer of soil and forest debris. Nearby was a weathered yellow fabric that appeared to be the remnants of a t-shirt, the same distinctive color Lars had been wearing in the airport footage. Initial forensic examination suggested the remains had been there for several years. A partially preserved wallet contained a deteriorated but still recognizable German ID card. Preliminary DNA testing, expedited due to the high-profile nature of the case, confirmed what many had suspected: Lars Mittank had been found, but the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. The location was puzzling. How had Lars traveled 12 kilometers from the airport on foot without being spotted? And while the remains showed no signs of violent trauma, the unusual positioning and certain peculiarities about the scene suggested this wasn't a simple case of a man who had become lost and succumbed to the elements. Perhaps most significant was what forensic toxicologists found in the limited tissue samples that could still be tested. Traces of cefuroxime were present, confirming Lars had taken his prescribed medication. However, they also detected something unexpected: significant levels of an unidentified substance that shared chemical properties with several synthetic recreational drugs that had been circulating in Bulgarian tourist areas in 2014. Further testing identified this substance as a now-banned designer drug that had briefly appeared on the European club scene between 2013 and 2015. Known by the street name Pulse, it was a potent stimulant and hallucinogen that had been linked to several cases of extreme paranoia and psychotic episodes. Most significantly, it was known to interact dangerously with certain antibiotics, including cefuroxime. Another crucial piece of evidence emerged from Lars's recovered personal effects. His damaged but partially functional phone was recovered at the scene. Digital forensic experts managed to extract data including text messages and notes Lars had written to himself in the hours before his disappearance. These writings revealed increasing paranoia, with references to being followed by the men from the bar and belief that his medication had been tampered with. The investigation quickly focused on how Lars might have encountered this substance. Interviews with staff at the bar where the altercation occurred revealed that one of the men involved had indeed been suspected of dealing designer drugs to tourists. Could Lars have unknowingly ingested something during the confrontation? Or perhaps more disturbingly, had someone deliberately added something to his food or drink afterward? Forensic analysis. The forensic examination of the scene where Lars Mittank's remains were discovered yielded critical insights into his final hours. The team, led by renowned forensic anthropologist Dr. Marta Vasileva, conducted a meticulous analysis of both the physical evidence and the environmental factors surrounding the site. What we observed was consistent with someone experiencing a severe psychotic episode, Dr. Vasileva explained in her official report. The distribution of personal items, the way clothing had been partially removed, and the position of the remains all suggest disoriented behavior before death. The yellow t-shirt that had helped identify the site was found several meters away from the main concentration of remains, suggesting Lars had been removing layers of clothing, a behavior sometimes observed in cases of extreme delirium when victims experience distorted temperature perception. Soil analysis beneath and around the remains indicated Lars had likely died within 24 to 48 hours of his disappearance from the airport. Entomological evidence, specifically the succession of insects that had colonized the body, supported this timeline, placing his death most likely on the evening of July 8th or the morning of July 9th, 2014. Particularly revealing was the enhanced toxicological analysis conducted by Dr. Nikolai Horvath's team at the European Forensic Chemistry Laboratory. Using advanced mass spectrometry techniques not available in 2014, they identified not just the presence of the designer drug Pulse, but also measured its concentration. What we found suggests an extremely high dosage, Dr. Horvath stated. Combined with the cefuroxime in his system, this would have created a potentially catastrophic drug interaction. The antibiotic would have inhibited the metabolization of the stimulant, effectively multiplying its potency and duration. Digital forensics recovered from Lars's damaged phone painted a harrowing picture of his mental state. Location data showed an erratic path from the airport through rural areas, avoiding roads and populated areas, consistent with someone believing they were being pursued. A series of unsent text messages drafted to his mother in his final hours revealed increasing disorientation and paranoia. "Can't trust anyone," read one message, time-stamped at 14:32 on July 8th. "They're all watching. The medication is poison. They're making me see things." Perhaps most significant was the forensic examination of Lars's footwear. His running shoes showed extreme wear patterns consistent with someone running at maximum speed over rough terrain for an extended period. The damage to the soles indicated he had covered significantly more distance than the 12 kilometers separating the airport from where he was found, suggesting he had been moving in circles or backtracking repeatedly. Environmental evidence at the site told the final chapter of Lars's story. The secluded area where he was found featured a small natural depression partially hidden by dense vegetation, precisely the type of shelter someone might seek if they believed they were being hunted. Scratch marks on nearby trees and disturbed earth suggested disoriented, frantic behavior consistent with someone experiencing hallucinations and extreme paranoia. The medication theory. The identification of the drug interaction between cefuroxime and the designer stimulant Pulse transformed our understanding of Lars Mittank's behavior. What had seemed inexplicably bizarre now appeared to be a textbook case of a severe adverse drug reaction compounded by unfortunate circumstances. Dr. Helena Schmidt, a clinical pharmacologist specializing in adverse drug interactions, reviewed the case findings in 2025. What we're looking at here is a perfect storm of pharmacological factors, she explained. Cefuroxime, while generally safe, belongs to a class of antibiotics that can significantly impair the liver's ability to metabolize certain other compounds. When combined with stimulants like the one identified in Lars' system, the effects can be dramatically amplified. The timeline of Lars's declining mental state aligns perfectly with this explanation. He was prescribed cefuroxime on the morning of July 7th. According to the medication schedule written by Dr. Kostov, he would have taken his first dose that morning and a second dose that evening. The onset of his paranoid behavior, first reported by hotel staff on the night of July 7th, corresponds with the buildup of the antibiotic in his system. If Lars had unknowingly ingested the designer drug, either during or after the bar altercation on July 6th, it might have initially caused mild stimulation that wouldn't have seemed alarming. However, as the cefuroxime accumulated in his system over the next 24 hours, its inhibiting effect on his liver's ability to clear the stimulant would have created a snowballing reaction. By the morning of July 8th, when Lars arrived at the airport, he would have been experiencing the full effects of this interaction. Dr. Schmidt noted, these could include extreme paranoia, hallucinations, and an overwhelming fight-or-flight response to perceived threats. This explains not only Lars' sudden flight from the airport, but also his fixation on the medication itself. In his increasingly paranoid state, he seems to have correctly identified the cefuroxime as part of what was happening to him, but misattributed it to deliberate poisoning rather than an unfortunate interaction. Text messages recovered from his phone show he had been researching the medication online, writing to a friend. "This stuff they gave me isn't right. Look it up. It's making me hear things." In his compromised mental state, Lars may have been experiencing the early warning signs of the drug interaction, but lacked the clarity to understand what was happening. The case has since become a cautionary tale in pharmacological circles about the dangers of unknown drug interactions, particularly when prescribed medications are combined with unregulated substances. It also highlights the vulnerability of travelers who may find themselves isolated in foreign countries while experiencing medical emergencies, particularly those affecting mental state and decision-making. Similar cases and pattern recognition. Lars Mittank's case, while uniquely compelling due to the dramatic airport footage, is far from isolated. The 2025 breakthrough prompted researchers to identify patterns across similar disappearances, revealing striking commonalities that might help prevent future tragedies. Dr. Simone Berger, a forensic psychologist specializing in missing persons cases, compiled a database of over 50 incidents between 2000 and 2025, sharing key elements with Lars's disappearance. What we found was a distinct pattern we now call paradoxical flight syndrome, cases where individuals suddenly flee from safety into dangerous situations due to altered perceptions of threat, she explained. One remarkably similar case occurred in 2016 when Bryce Laspisa, a 19-year-old American college student, inexplicably abandoned his car near a lake in California and disappeared into remote terrain. Like Lars, Bryce had been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior in the days before his disappearance, and like Lars, he was last seen fleeing from safety rather than toward it. Though Bryce remains missing, the parallels to the Mittank case are unmistakable. Another case with striking similarities involved British tourist Gareth Huntley, who disappeared in Malaysia in 2014, the same year as Lars. Huntley reportedly left a tourist area to go hiking alone after exhibiting unusual behavior and was later found deceased in the jungle. Though initially treated as a simple case of a hiker becoming lost, re-examination in light of the Mittank findings has raised questions about whether similar factors might have been involved. Perhaps most revealing is the case of Kenny Veach, an experienced hiker who disappeared in the Nevada desert in 2014 after describing finding a mysterious cave that gave him strange physical sensations. Analysis of his final communications showed patterns of thought disturbance similar to those observed in Lars's last text messages. Dr. Berger's research identified key commonalities across these cases. The victims were predominantly young men, ages 18 to 35, often in unfamiliar environments, and frequently had experienced some form of physical or psychological stress in the days before their disappearance. In over 60% of the cases where toxicology was possible, substances that could trigger paranoia or altered perception were detected. What makes the Mittank case so valuable is that the 2025 discovery provides the complete picture that's missing in many similar disappearances. Dr. Berger noted, "We now have the beginning, middle, and end of the narrative, allowing us to understand the progression from normal behavior to the final outcome." This pattern recognition has led to the development of new protocols for search and rescue operations. Called the Mittank Protocol, these guidelines emphasize considering psychological and pharmacological factors when someone disappears in circumstances suggesting disoriented flight rather than becoming accidentally lost. The protocol particularly focuses on expanding search areas based on the understanding that someone in a drug-induced psychotic state may travel much farther than typically expected, often in illogical patterns. The psychology of disappearance. Understanding the psychological mechanisms behind Lars Mittank's behavior provides crucial insights not just into his specific case but into the broader phenomenon of unexplained disappearances, what happens in the human mind that can make someone abandon safety, discard possessions, and flee into dangerous, unknown territory. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a neuropsychiatrist who specializes in altered states of consciousness, explains that Lars's behavior perfectly exemplifies what happens when our brain's threat detection system overrides rational thought. The brain's amygdala, our fear center, can essentially hijack normal cognitive processes when it perceives extreme danger, she explains. This creates a state where the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making, is bypassed entirely. In Lars's case, the drug interaction likely triggered this override mechanism, creating what psychiatrists call a threat-focused paranoid state. In this condition, ordinary stimuli, like the construction worker entering the doctor's office at the airport, can be misinterpreted as life-threatening dangers requiring immediate escape. What makes these cases particularly tragic is the self-reinforcing nature of the paranoia. Once Lars began fleeing, the physical exertion, increased heart rate, and sensory overload would have further intensified his altered state. The physical symptoms of extreme exertion, racing heart, shortness of breath, sweating, mirror those of intense fear, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the belief that danger is imminent. We see in Lars's phone notes that he interpreted his own physiological stress responses as confirmation that something was wrong, notes Dr. Chen. He wrote about his racing heart being proof that they were doing something to him, when in reality it was his body's natural response to the stimulant in his continuous running. This explains why Lars continued fleeing long after he had left the airport far behind. In his altered state, distance from the perceived initial threat wouldn't have provided relief because the threat had been internalized. He was fleeing not just from external dangers but from terrifying sensations and thoughts originating within his own mind. Survival psychologist Dr. Martin Hoffman points out that Lars's behavior follows predictable patterns seen in extreme stress reactions. When someone believes they're fighting for their life, they enter a state of hypervigilance where conservation of energy becomes irrelevant, he explains. This explains the superhuman-seeming endurance some people display in these situations, running until complete physical collapse. The recovered text drafts from Lars's phone reveal another common aspect of these psychological states, the desire to communicate coupled with an inability to do so coherently. Many of his unsent messages begin normally but devolve into fragmented thoughts or abrupt endings, suggesting he was struggling to organize his thoughts even as he felt an urgent need to reach out. Perhaps most poignant is what Dr. Chen calls moments of clarity, brief periods where Lars seems to have partially recognized something was wrong with his thinking. In one note timed at 18:07 on July 8th, he wrote, "Something's wrong with my head, not thinking straight, need to call mom, but what if they're listening?" This insight tragically wasn't strong enough to overcome the overwhelming fear driving his behavior. What actually happened? Based on the evidence uncovered in 2025 and subsequent forensic analysis, we can now reconstruct the most likely sequence of events in the case of Lars Mittank with greater clarity than ever before. The critical chain of events began during the bar altercation on July 6, 2014. While the exact details remain unclear, it appears that during this confrontation, Lars was either deliberately or accidentally exposed to the designer drug Pulse. This may have occurred through a spiked drink, as an intentional act by one of the men involved in the altercation, or potentially through environmental exposure if the substance was being used by others nearby. Initially, the effects would have been relatively mild, perhaps a sense of heightened energy or alertness that Lars might have attributed to adrenaline from the confrontation itself. The following morning, when he complained of ear pain and was diagnosed with a ruptured eardrum, there was nothing in his behavior that alarmed the examining physician enough to suspect drug influence. The prescription of cefuroxime set the stage for what would follow. As Lars began taking the antibiotic as directed, 500 mg twice daily, it gradually inhibited his liver's ability to metabolize the stimulant already in his system. By the evening of July 7th, the drug levels in his bloodstream had reached a threshold where psychological effects became pronounced, manifesting as the paranoia reported by hotel staff. The morning of July 8th represents the culmination of this building chemical interaction. When Lars arrived at the airport, he was likely experiencing intense paranoia but still maintaining enough composure to function normally, checking in, proceeding to the medical screening, and interacting with airport personnel. The airport doctor's examination was a pivotal moment. When the construction worker entered the room during his consultation, Lars appears to have experienced what psychiatrists call a paranoid break, a sudden, overwhelming conviction that he was in imminent danger. The famous airport footage captures the immediate aftermath of this break. Lars wasn't running randomly, he was fleeing what he genuinely perceived as a life-threatening situation. The recovered phone data shows he initially headed toward dense woodland areas southwest of the airport, actively avoiding roads and populated areas where he believed they might find him. Over the next several hours, Lars traveled in an erratic pattern, covering significantly more ground than would be expected given the straight-line distance between the airport and where he was ultimately found. GPS data from his partially recovered phone shows he changed direction multiple times, sometimes doubling back or moving in circles. Behavior consistent with someone trying to evade perceived pursuers or responding to hallucinatory stimuli. By late afternoon, approximately 8 hours after fleeing the airport, Lars had reached the wooded area where his remains would eventually be discovered. Physical evidence suggests he sought shelter in a small natural depression, possibly believing it would hide him from those he thought were pursuing him. The removal of his shirt and other unusual behavior at the site indicate he was experiencing hypothermia, a common effect of stimulant overdose combined with extreme physical exertion. The cause of death was ultimately determined to be a combination of dehydration, physical exhaustion, and cardiovascular stress induced by the drug interaction. The remote location, combined with his efforts to remain hidden, meant that search teams in 2014 focused primarily on areas closer to the airport, never located him.